I'm going to touch on something I shouldn't really touch on, which
Oh,
is the calendar that was used by the ancients and was kept by the Qumran community was the most ancient calendar, and they divided the time for the human race on the earth into 7 eras, 7 sections, 7,000 years, and they divided that up into centuries, and then into days. There was 10 days. 10 is the number of fullness. 7 is the number of 10 is the number of completion, and 7 is the number of perfection. And they divided the days up into jubilees. Now, the thing that is extraordinary about this calendar is that at the end of every 2,000 years, you have a cycle that a civilization rises, peaks, and disintegrates. And you have another cycle then that rises and peaks and disintegrates. To just sort of not spend the whole morning on this, we're at the end of a cycle. We're at the end of the church age. Luke 21:24, that the Jewish people would be oppressed until the age of the Gentiles was completely over. Now, the age of the Gentiles is coming to an end right now. Hence, you see disintegration in the earth, you see disintegration in society, you see disintegration in the church, and all the rest of it. And we're not to be surprised or shocked or anything else. Knowledge actually frees us. Hosea 6:4 or 4:6, I forget which it is, it's probably 4:6, says that without knowledge, people perish. Without understanding, you won't be able to just cooperate with what's going on in the earth. In order for this cycle to complete itself, maybe if I went back a bit, when I was introducing the Gospel of Matthew, you'll find this on either EWTN or Shalom World in my programs on Matthew. I showed some of the early cycles of the world. For example, the ancient Egyptian world had a long time to develop, and it peaked at the time of Moses, when Moses, who was a son of God, small s, spoke to them and asked them that instead of their false gods, that they would worship the true God. And he demonstrated who the true God was to them in all the signs and wonders that unfortunately we call plagues. And the people who put their faith in the true God followed Moses out of Egypt. That's the Exodus, and started a completely new life. So they started a new cycle. And the incredible thing about Egypt is that once the new cycle of the people of God started, Egypt went into steep decline. Steep decline. So Egypt turned out to be the womb in which the people of God were conceived and born, and the Exodus was their ejection from the womb. And so they were given approximately 2,000 years to reach their peak, when the actual Son of God, one like Moses, but the real Son of God, came and challenged them to come with him into the new era. And during his lifetime, the two eras were overlapping. And so for the people who were following Jesus, they were living in both eras. And so it was a bit awkward for them, because they were expected to fulfill the law of Moses, and they were expected to live the new life of Christ as well. That was rather difficult. And then you get the crisis in which the new people of God are turfed out of Israel. So Israel then had become the womb of the new people of God.
Mm.
They're turfed out. Israel went into steep decline. What I mean by that is by the year 132 AD, they were actually exiled from their own land. They were no longer allowed to live in it. So that's sudden death. So then the church has been given 2,000 years to reach its peak.
Yeah.
And it has rejected the Christ. It has rejected Christianity. And if you reject the Christ and the Christianity, there's actually nowhere else to go. But in this steep decline that we're in, which means that, they let go of the commandments, they let go of absolutely everything. So the demons come in and take over. Don't particularly want to go down that route at this moment because there's an awful lot that can be said about it. Because there's never a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum is a scientific principle. And so if we throw God out, the demons come in. And they just come in modern form, all the rest of it. So you start doing all the same stuff that was done before. And if you look at the symptoms of the disease, the doctor will say, well, that's the disease that we had 100 years ago. We thought we had eradicated it, but obviously it's turning up again. And that's what's going on now, except that it's going on a global scale. When at the time of Christ, when Israel had gone into apostasy, it was only on a national scale. It didn't affect the rest of the world. What's happening now is that it's happening on a global scale, and therefore it is a global crisis. And what's going to happen at the end of this is something that I am very, very clear about, and I've been telling people for many years, and that is that we have to have the death and resurrection of the church. It has to be. If you go back to John chapter 21, you have that very interesting scene after the gospel. Sorry, I should say after the gospel, after the resurrection, in which Jesus is speaking to Peter and the apostles. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn this off. After they have met Jesus at the Sea of Galilee and they've had breakfast with him, and he reappoints Peter in charge. Then he says to him, Peter, when you are old, they will take you to a place you'd rather not go to, which means prison and death. Okay. And then Peter says, what about him?
To John.
Would you ever explain what you've just said to me? He just says, what about him? What about John? And then Jesus said, what is it to you if he lasts until the second coming, until I come? And so, as John himself said, the rumor went around that John was going to last till the second coming. Well, he outlived them all, so they probably thought he was going to wait until the second coming. What people don't realize is that that's not just a statement of reality about Peter and John. It's a prophetic statement on the part of Christ. At the time when this would become a reality, the church would be divided into the Petrine church and all the other believers. The Petrine church is represented by Peter. All the other believers are represented by John. And the Petrine church, when it was old, would have to be taken where it wouldn't like to go and actually give its life.
Wow. Yeah.
This is actually terribly but that the church, as in the believers, would go on until the second coming. In other words, the church would survive, but the Petrine church would have to do this. Why would that be so? Jesus is the head, and we're the body. The head gave his life for the redemption of the world. And since the Petrine church claims to be the body of Christ, as distinct from all the other believers who we know are the body of Christ, okay, then the body must also lay down its life for the redemption of the world, so that the whole Christ has actually laid down its life.